After the US dropped its so-called bunker buster bombs on Iran in June 2025, an American base in Qatar suddenly found itself in the crosshairs. These satellite images show how aircraft stationed here left the base just days before the US strike, perhaps in anticipation of an Iranian counterstrike. The strike did come. The Americans said all Iranian missiles were intercepted. But analysis by the Associated Press shows damage to this dome, housing secure US communications equipment. Al Qudayd Air Base is just one of America's vast network of more than 750 military outposts scattered across 80 countries and territories. But why do these bases exist, and are they worth it? We spoke to David Vine, who's spent the last 25 years tracking America's overseas military bases and counting the cost.
Are they making us safer, as many people have long claimed? Might they be actually undermining US national security?
Using satellite imagery, we analysed the evolution of America's military bases abroad, from the frozen to the tropical, from the abandoned to the expanding. And we visited one of the biggest.
I'm here at U.S. Army Garrison Bavaria in Germany. At 92 square miles, it's actually the largest U.S. Army training area outside of the U.S.
Viewed from above, America's sprawling military outposts, even those pixelated on Google Earth, come into sharp focus. The United States has military bases on every continent apart from Antarctica. The UK has the second largest network of overseas military sites, with a permanent presence in more than 100 locations worldwide. Russia, France and Turkey each operate a small number, while China has one official foreign military base.
The United States has about 75 to 85% of the world's foreign military bases.
US military bases vary in size. Some are small, like this American drone facility at Cebele in Djibouti. Uncrewed aircraft here have been well positioned for missions in Somalia and Yemen, as well as in the fight against the Islamic State militant group in Iraq and Syria. In this Google Earth image, you can make out what appear to be MQ-9 Reaper drones. Other bases, like the Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan, are the size of large towns. The 18,000 Americans living here enjoy access to schools, a softball complex, a dive shop, and an 18-hole golf course. Each base is, or at least was, built for a very specific reason. Take a look at America's northernmost military base at Patuxik in Greenland. It was built in 1951 as a defense against airborne threats from the Soviet Union. About 150 miles northeast of Patuxik Space Base is, or was, Camp Century. In 1959, the US built a network of tunnels just beneath the ice surface, under the cover of a scientific research station. Over the decades, accumulating snow and ice have buried the tunnels to a depth of around 30 meters. In the end, Camp Century couldn't survive a mix of engineering failures, moving ice, and political pushback from Denmark, which oversees the island's defense and security. In 1967, as quickly and quietly as it was built, the base was abandoned. In 2024, NASA snapped this radar image, revealing the ghostly imprint of the city under the ice. There are still concerns about radioactive waste buried there. The US is clinging to its outpost in Patuxik, which it uses to monitor military satellites. But there's more to it than that. In 2025, the Trump administration talked of buying, even invading Greenland.
And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Greenlanders and their former colonial rulers, the Danish, insisted Greenland was not for sale. Patuxik isn't the only US base hidden away in distant corners of the map. In fact, being remote is often very deliberate.
That makes them hard to see for many people in a host country or others around the world, although of course they would be visible from above.
This 2.5 square mile outpost is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Wake Island is about 2,400 miles from Hawaii, roughly the distance from New York to San Francisco. The nearest US military base is on the island of Guam, about 1,500 miles to the west. About 100 soldiers and defense contractors are based here at any given time. The US first took control of Wake Island in 1899, but it didn't build a military base there until 1941, as war with Japan became likely.
Wake Island devastated by the daring raid, a story to remember on Navy Day.
The Marshall Islands have disputed US ownership for decades, arguing that the land historically belonged to them. The US sees Wake Island as a crucial mid-Pacific hub, handling hundreds of military and cargo landings every year since the 1970s. Of course, resupplying, staffing and running these far-flung outposts comes at a huge expense.
My best estimate is that US taxpayers are paying around $80 billion a year to maintain US bases on other countries' soil. And $80 billion is a larger budget than almost any other government agency.
As we can see with Patufic and Wake Island, these outposts are the legacies of past wars. In fact, you can look back as far as America's founding, with bases created by a newly formed United States as it began expanding westward.
Bases on Native American people's lands helped enable the expansion of the United States across the North American continent. Many of these bases are still in place to this day.
In the late 1800s, the US began looking further afield. Starting in the Pacific and Caribbean, it annexed Hawaii and took control of islands such as Guam and Puerto Rico. During World War I, the US ramped up its military presence overseas, and by the end of World War II, it had built hundreds of military installations.
The US military during World War II built more bases than any country, people, or empire in world history.
After the Second World War, President Harry Truman pledged that the US would step in to help protect any democratic nation that was under threat.
I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures.
Permanent infrastructure of US military bases abroad remained very much in place and actually grew over time in the early days of the Cold War amid the US and Allied war in Korea. And the numbers of bases fluctuated. They increased again during the US-led war in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia in Southeast Asia.
During the Cold War, Germany marked the dividing line between the Soviet Union and its satellite states and Western Europe. And 8 decades after World War II, it still has more US military bases than any other nation. This is United States Army Garrison Bavaria. The headquarters at Grafenwohr was a prison camp during World War I, and then a training facility for the Nazi war machine during World War II. Today it's the largest US Army training area outside America. Satellite images of the base show orderly rows of barracks, training fields, and tank trails. Take a look at this satellite image of the nearby Hohenfels training area. These are lines of trenches. In this footage, soldiers from 2nd Cavalry Regiment are conducting an exercise to clear the trenches of enemy fighters, with the help of drones.
Once we clear out the trench, we're going to go set up a hasty defense position. Once we're done with the defense for that night, we're going to be setting up an ambush for the next day.
Not far away, soldiers are carrying out another drill. This time, US Army soldiers are launching an assault out in the open, using Stryker vehicles, drones, and machine guns firing blank rounds. Back at HQ, you'll spot more than just military activity. There are schools, sports fields, and shopping malls, catering to the service personnel and their families who live and work here.
There are 16,000 family members of service members, spouses, and children. And so there's a lot of schools. There's 8 total schools on U.S. Army Garrison Bavaria.
Many US bases abroad are like little Americas, and that's by design.
So many things that make you feel like you're at home. I mean, Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, Burger King, Subway, on and on. There's football fields, gyms with CrossFit equipment. They definitely go out of their way to make the soldiers living and working here feel like they're at home.
We are Americans. We do bring our culture, and it's okay to display our culture.
The US's long-standing presence in Western Europe now has a new sense of urgency: the war in Ukraine.
If we go on an hour west from here, we're going into the Czech Republic. If we continue driving, in about 18 hours, we're in Kyiv. So we are already here.
After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the US Department of Defense deployed 20,000 more troops across Europe, bringing the total in the region to more than 100,000. This is one of the largest deployments of US troops in Europe since the end of the Cold War. But the US build-up really began in 2014, after Russia annexed Crimea. That year, units from all branches began rotating deployments in the Baltic states and Poland. Since 2014, the US also has an armoured battalion in Lithuania, which borders Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad enclave on the Baltic Sea. As tensions with Russia grew, US forces in Lithuania moved into Camp Herkus, less than 10 miles from the border with Belarus. And in Poznan, in Poland, US soldiers have been garrisoned permanently as of 2023. Poland is also home to the US military's newest base in Europe at Redzikowo. The base is obscured on Google Earth, but visible on these satellite images from Planet Labs. US Army engineers broke ground at the site in 2016, although it didn't become operational until late 2024. The base is equipped with interceptor missiles, as well as a sophisticated radar system that can track missiles from hostile states. While the US expands its military presence in Europe, NATO and the American administration are showing signs that European allies shouldn't rely on US protection forever.
America's allies have broad shoulders, and Europe and Canada will do more for our shared security.
As conflicts and threats evolve, static bases can become obsolete. That's where America's floating armies come in. In March 2025, the US Navy launched its largest ever Middle East operation under Trump, deploying FA-18 Super Hornet fighters from the USS Harry S. Truman, and firing Tomahawk missiles from the USS Gettysburg cruiser to strike Houthi targets in Yemen. The USS Carl Vinson, a floating airbase with a crew of 5,000, was also in the region to deter escalation and support operations amid rising Israel-Iran tensions. And just like the bases on land, America has more aircraft carriers than any other nation. But not everything in the US arsenal is visible on the surface. In June 2025, the USS Georgia, a nuclear-powered Ohio-class submarine, launched Tomahawk missiles at Iranian nuclear targets from the Gulf of Oman.
In the past 25 years, we've seen a major buildup of US military bases in the greater Middle East as part of the so-called war on terror. And while the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have ended, the US military presence in the region has, for the most part, remained in place.
But the story of US bases is not only one of expansion. Zoom in on Afghanistan. Bagram Airfield, around 35 miles from Kabul, was seized by British and American forces during their invasion in 2001. Early satellite images from that period show a modest facility with a single runway. Over the next decade, it rapidly grew into a full-scale military base. Satellite images from May 2021 show what appear to be Chinook helicopters, F-16 fighter jets, and C-17 transport aircraft on the base. But 2 months later, soon after America's planned withdrawal, the only thing left were the silhouettes of jets painted onto the tarmac. Later that year, a lightning advance by the Taliban across the country saw a panicked withdrawal from the international airport in Kabul. In these satellite images from August 2021, you can see thousands of people massed at the gates of the airport, crowding around planes on the tarmac and surging onto the runway in a desperate attempt to secure a flight out of the country. The crowded airport became a target for suicide bombers. An attack on August the 26th killed more than 180 people, including 13 US military personnel.
This, unsurprisingly, looks like the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, where they left behind bases and weaponry and materiel. It's more expensive to ship it home or take it with them, or more cumbersome, more difficult.
In its hasty departure, the US left behind $7 billion of military equipment, including aircraft, trucks, and heavy armored vehicles, all quickly seized by the Taliban.
In some ways, it's an old imperial story where empires wage wars and then eventually people kick them out.
Footage from August the 14th, 2024 shows Taliban forces marking the third anniversary of their takeover with a military parade at Bagram Air Base. In this satellite image taken the day before, you can just make out the same red canopy. In recent years, much of America's focus has shifted east to the threat it senses from China. The South China Sea has become one of the most contested regions in the world. China, the Philippines, and Vietnam have come close to conflict here, building artificial islands and turning them into military outposts, complete with runways, radar systems, and missile sites. Zoom out a little and you'll also see a growing US footprint. Bases in the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and training areas in Australia.
And these bases are quite clearly designed to contain the military, but really mostly economic and political rise of China that we've seen over the past couple decades or more. I often encourage people to think about how we US citizens, for example, would feel if China were to build even a single base anywhere near the borders of the United States. China does not have any bases anywhere close to the United States.
Yet in 2023, the US secured access to 4 new strategic military sites in the Philippines, including Naval Base Camilo Osias and Balabac Island. And further out in the Pacific, the US is reviving some old military sites after decades of neglect. This is the island of Tinian, part of the Northern Mariana Islands. During the Second World War, the island was used as a staging post for US attacks on Japan.
I've been to Tinian and was able to ride up to this former airfield where the first atomic weapon to be used was loaded and then took off from this runway and was dropped on Hiroshima.
Take a look at this image from 2020 and you can barely make out the runway. But as you can see in this image from 2025, recent US military investment has reshaped Tinian's landscape with a new 8,600-foot runway, aircraft parking aprons, and fuel storage facilities. This $800 million rebuild aims to strengthen the US military presence across the Indo-Pacific region. Over 5,000 miles away, the remote island of Diego Garcia has also seen America flex its military muscle. In April 2025, the US deployed at least 6 stealth bombers here, as a show of force ahead of nuclear talks with Iran. The US military has occupied the base since the late 1960s in a $14 million secret deal with the British government.
In exchange for the British government doing the dirty work of getting rid of the local indigenous Chagosian people who US government officials wanted gone.
In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the entire indigenous Chagosian population was forcibly deported 1,200 miles away to clear the island for the US military base. Over time, the base grew into a key launch point for US operations against Africa, the Middle East, and Asia.
All the major wars in the greater Middle East have involved the use of the base on Diego Garcia, including the First and Second Gulf Wars against Iraq.
And this strategy continues to play out today. On March the 15th, 2025, the US conducted airstrikes against Houthi targets from here. These images, provided by Planet Labs, show the aftermath of a US strike on Ras Isa fuel port in Yemen. After years of negotiations about the future of Diego Garcia, the UK struck a deal to lease the island for another 99 years.
As we've long suspected, that the US military intends to stay on Diego Garcia in the middle of the Indian Ocean for decades to come.
America's overseas bases aren't just expensive, they're also harmful to the environment.
Fuels, oils, lubricants, other things that are generally not good for the environment. And when a US military base closes, the US military, unfortunately, outside the United States has had a pretty terrible track record when it comes to cleaning up the environmental damage that US bases have caused. Frequently, it's left to the host nation to clean up that environmental damage.
In many places, groundwater contamination, soil pollution, and hazardous waste remain for decades. By 2024, the Pentagon said it had cut its emissions to less than half its peak in 1990, but they were still on a par with the emissions of entire mid-sized European countries. There are 120 US bases scattered across Japan. 70% of them are in Okinawa. The local communities here have long protested contamination from toxic chemicals linked to the facilities.
自分が出したゴミは自分であなた方のお金で処理しなさいと。
The US military presence in Guam has left a legacy of environmental damage, including contamination of soil and groundwater from hazardous waste and fuel spills. This footage shows soldiers detonating explosives, sending clouds of smoke into the air at Andersen Air Force Base. Beyond the environmental damage, these bases often dominate the landscape, providing little benefit to the local population.
Often they are occupying quite expensive real estate in beautiful places like Okinawa, beautiful tropical island, or Guam, also in places in Germany where other activities, economic activities could be undertaken that would benefit a local economy.
But many nations continue to rely on the Americans deployed on their doorstep. For example, the US base at Camp Humphreys in South Korea, which people here see as a useful deterrent to aggression from the north. Future warfare will require different types of overseas bases. The war in Ukraine has demonstrated that large static bases are vulnerable, in particular to drone attacks. More recently established American military outposts abroad, like drone bases, have a smaller footprint and they're harder to identify.
There are other ways that US military bases abroad conceal their presence, the most prominent of which is locating a US military base within a host nation base, which makes it hard to distinguish what is a US base, what is a foreign base.
Take this airbase in Somalia. It's marked on the map as the Baildoggle Air Base, run by the Somali National Army. But it also houses what the US military calls a cooperative security location, also known as a lily pad, a small covert military installation.
These are bases that are occupied typically by as few as a few dozen or a couple hundred military personnel, troops, and they have very few facilities other than basic living facilities. Lily pad bases are frequently located in places where a host nation doesn't want people to know that there is a base.
The presence of the US military in Baildoggle isn't secret, but the kinds of military activity it's running from the base certainly seem to be. A 2017 satellite image appears to show a US spy plane, a small U-28A fixed-wing aircraft at the base. Similar covert sites are active across Africa, and the US continues to build more around the world. Trump has spoken of ending wars and of reducing America's overseas military footprint. But as we saw with the bombing of the nuclear sites in Iran, it's clear that nothing is off the table.
Right now, it's very difficult to know what will happen if President Trump was to embrace the kind of old school colonialism that he has certainly expressed some affinity for. We could very much see new US bases in places like Greenland, the Panama Canal Zone, even Gaza. I think we're at a major fork in the road. I think there's a major choice facing the United States. Whether the United States will continue to embrace what I see as a long, outdated military strategy of encircling the globe with military bases, or will pursue a different path, building up its diplomatic presence around the world.